Hey everybody, welcome to Drive Thru Review 788. Today we're going to talk about Primal the Awakening. As you can see, I got all kinds of stuff here. It's quite the involved game. There's a lot of stuff, so it's going to be kind of a bear to film everything. So I'm going to give you a relatively brief overview. The game's a little bit involved, but it's not too bad. What the game is a 1 to 4 player boss battling campaign game, although you don't necessarily have to play it as a campaign. And if I had to kind of cinch it up, probably, let's say unfairly, it would be kind of like Monster Hunter, which is a video game series, which I've never played. But it's kind of like that, but a board game style, where you're going to be going through and interacting and fighting these different big bads, and then sort of like collecting resources out of them or out of that encounter to sort of take back to your camp, so to speak, and then, you know, level up equipment and all that kinds of thing, kind of unlock new forges. And these different forges will allow you to buy different items and upgrade your weapons and all kinds of stuff, get different potions and that kind of thing. But the game is driven through, the main way to play it was to be like an 11-part campaign, but you have multiple kind of varying paths that you can take through that 11-part campaign. So it's kind of like 11 sort of chapters in a story, but depending on which expansions you may or may not have, you will unlock different possibilities in terms of the quests. So the path through the story is going to be different kind of each time you play. And the game does give you rules for setting up different level challenges. If you want to just say, like, pick a character and then pick a sort of a challenge level, and then that will kind of dictate what sort of level your character will be, what level the boss monster that you're fighting will be, and so on. So you can kind of just play it that way, kind of like, let's call it like an arcade mode type of thing. So let's go down to the table, show you kind of all the pieces and stuff that you're going to be interacting with, how the game flow works and all that. Then I'll kind of come back and tell you my thoughts. Okay, so this is like the main game board that you're going to be playing on here. This is the neoprene mat here. I should say, I don't think I said the name of the publisher. Reggie Games is the publisher. They sent me a lot of the Kickstarter extras and some of the expansions. The typical thing that you're going to get here is this two-sided, fold-out board here. There's no real difference here between, the neoprene and this board, but this will give you kind of a close-up of some of the artwork on there. So you've got these 4 different zones that you can see out here that the figures will be moving around in. The big monster, the boss monster that you're going to be fighting here, will be facing, one of these different directions, like so. And you can see sort of the scale of these. These are a little bit smaller than, like most typical board games, but I think that actually works very well because it gives the monsters like a nice scale to them. So it still feels like a relatively, realistic scale, so to speak, but you don't have like these big old like wastes of plastic hitting out there. And I will say, it's not really a spoiler because it's right in the box here. So the big final boss here, the Awakening here, is that big guy. You can say that's kind of like the biggest, I think that's the biggest one in the game. I haven't measured it against like all the campaign or expansion monsters. Now this is the first one. I just set up the first scenario to try to avoid any kind of spoilers with some of the different effects and abilities and stuff, because as you play through, you're going to be interacting with different decks for the different monsters, behavior decks, peril decks, and so on. So I've just set up the beginner one here, and then you can see there's a whole stack of these boards here for all these different types of monsters in there. So you'll place these behavior cards. You'll have a deck of behavior cards specific for that monster, and then they'll have different triggers on them. So if the player plays one of these green defensive cards and it was out here with trigger, so these are attack cards. This is if you start your turn in front of the monster, which we can see 2 players over here already doing. And so as the players kind of react or act, then the boss is going to trigger a reaction there. And then there's some other sort of special cards here, like a lot of times they'll have this permanent ability, which either be like kind of a special, in this case, way to kind of do a lot of damage to the monster. Some of these you'll have to deal with, and like you'll instantly lose if you don't kind of handle the effect by this. And then they'll have different sort of special abilities that will be tied to different stances. So if we take a closer look at these cards, these are the stance cards, and you can see kind of like the threat level, the challenge level here. I've got the whole stack here, but depending on like where in the campaign or what quest you're playing or what kind of like, one-off setup, you'll have different sets of these. And so you can see this is here is stance 1. And once you do a certain amount of damage to it, then you're going to go to stance 2 and so on. The other thing it's going to tell you is how much damage the monster does when it hits you. So in this case 1, and then it'll theoretically go up sometimes. And then this is the sort of zone that you need to be into to do any damage. So if you're in either of these side zones, and this is all relative to, you know, the way the monster's facing, then you can't damage it in here. But as you can start to see, it'll change over the course of the different stances. So this one, once he gets to stance 3, you can hit him from anywhere. And so these are going to be corresponding with different special abilities and so on. And so you're going to kind of start to learn these decks as you play against the monster, and then, you know, dealing with the different stances, and maybe you fight a harder version later on. And so the players will be doing this through card play, and then at the end of the player's action round, you're going to draw 1 or more of these depending on a situation, and then this is going to check how many defensive cards that you've played during your turn. And then if you haven't played that many, then you're going to take damage. You're going to equal to whatever the damage indicator is there. So that's kind of the gist of the game. You basically keep playing turn after turn, monsters reacting to you. There'll be some other, like, you know, effects and stuff that are in play possibly. And then you're going to do a certain amount of damage to the monster to have to kill it, or you're either going to run out of the number of rounds. So if we look up here, this is kind of interesting how this works. So you can see basically all the monsters have 10 hit points, but it doesn't really quite work out that way. So we can see, okay, we're always going to start the marker at 10 and get it down to here. That's going to mean you defeated the monster. But the way that you do damage is a little bit different. So here we can say for every 2 damage per player, that's what that little white symbol means there. So if we're playing a 3-player game, for every 6 damage, that's going to equal 1 hit point of damage moving down there. And then you can see once you get to the 7 right there on this track, then you're going to flip the stance over. And then it's going to go up maybe. So 3 damage per player and so on. So that way, that is very simply how the game really, really works and really, really scales, is there is a lot of different things in the game that are kind of based on player count and leveling up and all that stuff. So the game really scales very well depending on, like, basically any kind of setup you can throw at it. Not obviously not throwing everything at the game, but that seems like one of the smarter things that the game does. So what does the player area look like? Well, each player is going to have this kind of dashboard, and again, this is the basic setup here. You're going to have your starting weapon, starting armor and helm, which is basically your hit points, because you can see this is basically the amount of damage you can take there. And then once you take this amount of damage, then you kind of reset. You'll have to, you know, basically cancel out one of those, and then you're going to have that many hit points left. You always start with this Aylmore potion to start the game, and these you'll carry over with you. And you can of course level up your weapons. Let's see if I have some examples here. So for this guy, as you unlock forges and things like that, you're going to get different access to different weapons, but also different levels of weapons. So you've got here the 3 levels of burning stone, the 3 levels of shell stones, and so on. And I'll talk more about those in a minute when we talk about the campaign stuff. And then you've got your deck of cards. So every player has kind of a unique deck of cards. We'll just flip these over. You can see these all have an S at the bottom. These are starter cards. And then you have your stance in a way. This is your special action thing. You'll have an S card. Now, during the course of the game, you can upgrade these to choose different ones. And the campaign will kind of tell you. So you've got these other A2, B2, and so on cards here. And then you've got extra cards that you can put into your deck. So you can see A1, A2, B2, C, and the campaign will tell you which ones you have access to. Now your deck always has to be made up of whatever your weapon tells you. So in this one you need 6 red cards, 6 blue cards, 6 yellow cards, 6 green cards. But if I upgraded to this burning stone, I'd need 6 red, 5 blue, 4 yellow, and then 5 green. So your deck's going to kind of change up. So no matter what you have access to, you always need a makeup of this style based on your weapon. And what these types of cards are is, we can look here. So the red cards are attack cards. Whenever you play this, you're going to be doing damage with a base damage of whatever your base weapon damage is there, in this case 2. And of course you'll have other modifiers from other items, maybe your stance or whatever, from abilities on the cards. And so you're going to be playing cards over the course of your turn, paying for different actions. Now you can see these all have a cost. So to play this yellow card, I need to spend another card worth for its stamina. So this is how much stamina it will generate. So this will generate 3 stamina, so I can maybe pay for a 3-cost card if I have one in here like this. And so you're gonna be playing cards and discarding cards to pay for them. And then, like I said, the red ones attack. The blue one here is going to affect the peril of the boss, which is an incremental sort of ability that can build up, and so it will have sometimes different abilities that will trigger off of that. So you try to like knock that down with the blue cards, and there'll be other cards here that will modify that. And then you have your defensive cards, which is like your green and your yellow cards, and these will be defensive. And again, depending on how many of those cards you played, then that will help block the damage called attrition damage from the boss. And they'll do all these other kind of special effects. So you basically just go round and round and round. Everybody's playing through that. When you go through your deck, you'll have to take like a fatigue action, or sorry, fatigue damage, which is you basically take damage equal to your weapon when you go through your deck there. And just some other interesting tidbits here, because it does get relatively involved, especially as you play through into later monsters. So you see you have this little threat sort of icon here. So if you played any with this red one, then this is like the aggro token. So if you played any, then you're going to take this from whoever has it, and then the monster itself is going to turn and face whoever that player was. So this guy's going to be kind of like moving around back and forth, and other effects will mess with that. And you're of course trying to get in a situation where you can hit it. And there's also of course your other terrain on the board. I've got here the terrain expansion. It comes with just tokens for those in the base game, but you can get miniatures for that as well. And those will have different effects, allowing you to kind of like hide and possibly stay put, because you have to always move. And again, you always have to spend a stamina to move, and you just move to one of these adjacent zones. If you don't move, you'll get a threat token, and then as you start to accrue those, then other cards and things will interact with that, so you might take more damage and stuff. So the game is trying to force you to keep kind of moving and keep kind of bouncing this around, and it's trying to set people up for different types of attacks and stuff. Because of course there'll be different attacks that if you attack from the rear, it's kind of like a backstab, and it depends on the character and stuff. Now if you have at least 2 cards left in your hand at the end of the round, you don't have to use them all, you will gain a stamina token. And you can always spend one of these. It's like a free payment for the stamina cost of one of the cards. So you can always sort of wait around a little bit longer there and sort of build up your stamina. And then again, you can see up here this marker. So you have basically 10 rounds to beat the monster, or if you get all defeated, or the monster gets defeated, then the game will end earlier as well. And so you're trying to juggle this around. Think about the abilities that you have. Also look at all the triggers here on the behavior track. At the end of the round, or beginning of the round, the next round, then the lowest one of these will get discarded. Sometimes there'll be special cards in there in that deck, or even in this attrition damage deck based on the monster. So you start to really try to piece together the puzzle of how to defeat these different bosses. And they also have little indications on the boss boards here, which are what their weaknesses are there. So there's different kind of sort of elemental types almost in a way. And so let me segue kind of into the expansion, because that's where we'll kind of get into some of that. So you've got 2 books that'll come with the base game. You've got the rule book, which is really well done. It's quite daunting because it's quite big, but I would not let that deter you, because it's very well illustrated, gives you good examples, lots of good, sort of ways to get into the game. And then the kind of the back half of this is just kind of like campaign stuff and extra scenarios and things like that, and tells you to kind of how to work through the campaign, how to play the one-off games and all that stuff, how the crafting of different items work. And then you've also got here this campaign book, which is quite sizable as well, which again has all this stuff. So you have here the main story parts. So you can see here chapter 9, chapter 7, and so on. So it'll see here as you play through different ones, it'll tell you to unlock this quest. This other quest will expire if you never did it, and then if you have this expansion, you unlock these quests. Or you might also tell you to unlock forges, upgrade forges, different things like that. So again, the chapter is always, or the story is always the same, but you may try out different quests, and especially if you have expansions and stuff like that, then you're going to get all kinds of different monsters, and some of these little monster boxes come with the extra quests and so on. There's one hero expansion that comes with 2 extra heroes, and so that's really going to add to the variety of things as you play. Now there's this little board here where you can put your quest cards, and I just set up like what it would look like after your first one, and you set these up in different areas. So this is like a nice reminder here. You can set those off to the side, so when you come back to your campaign, you can kind of see who you can go after and like what sort of environment those things are in. And you can see there's just a ton of these. These are just the base game quests here. I think there's like 44 different ones, and then you have some of the different reward cards and stuff like that. And then of course you can see all the different gear and items and stuff over here that you can get access to. And then here we have the forges, which I'll show. So some of the earlier stuff that you'll unlock are the herbalist here. So these are different potions, and you can see these are different sort of elements and different resources that you can get. There's not really like money in the game, but you get these different things that you sort of basically harvest out of your encounters. And that will allow you access to different types of things. So the other thing you will unlock early on is this fire forge. And you can see this one, you'll want to have a fire element, and then these are the resources here. And these are basically just for each class. So these are all the different hero types in the game, so you can upgrade your weapons there. And then the campaign, like I said, will tell you when you can start including these extra cards like that. So you basically just kind of go along and then, just upgrade your stuff, get new elements, get new items, level up the monsters, play through the story here, and then you've got all kinds of branching different quests and outcomes, and these will give you different rewards and stuff like that, little story beats and stuff. And there's a lot of kind of narrative text in here, which is, there's just tons of it. And then in addition to that, the campaign stuff, you've got kind of like we'll call it your boss rush or your arcade mode, and they give you different setups for some of the different bosses and stuff like that. And here, these are just for the one-offs, and you pick kind of like the level of the boss and then the level of the character, and it'll tell you what kind of stuff you can throw into your deck and what kind of level weapon and all that stuff. But that's pretty much the gist of the game. Okay, so that was a pretty brief overview of Primal: The Awakening. So we'll go into my 3 pillars of review. First, we'll talk about player count, and the game plays 1 to 4 players. Now, when you play it 1 player, you always control 2 heroes. So single player and 2 players, kind of the same thing. Now, I've not played it. I played it 1 player, and I played it 3 player, and I haven't played it 4 player. And I would say, I think I'd like it more with 3. I don't know. It's kind of feel like I'm just splitting the difference if you had to pin me down. The thing is like, obviously the reason you play it with 2 as a single player is because you need to sort of, spin the monster around and get it positioned right so the other character can make the good attack or get them out of harm's way and that kind of stuff. And so that part of the game is really cool, and I like kind of just personally just being at the table with other heads into the game. So it feels a little bit more immersive, kind of having that discussion there, and everybody kind of just knowing kind of what their deck can do and how their character kind of works is pretty cool. When you're doing it by yourself, it's still fine. Like, it still works really well. It's like a personal thing where I just like having the other discussion happening at the table. But I will say, I think this would make a great kind of solo game. I have a friend of mine actually, who's one of the people that was playing with us when we played our multiplayer games, and he's been really enjoying it solo, and he's made it, I think, much further through the campaign than I have even. And it's a nice sort of puzzly beat 'em up. So we'll get to that in a second. But the playtime, I don't think the box has a playtime on it. It usually takes I don't know, like about 2 hours for a session, give or take. It kind of just depends. It does seem to get quicker and quicker every time we play, because you just kind of know your deck more and you kind of know how things work. And then you're just kind of, addressing what the, new kind of threat and new mechanic of the boss is at the time. But again, like as you play it, it picks up pretty quick. I don't think it's going to go much longer than 2 hours, because the game does, and we'll kind of step into my last pillar, which is what is this game like. And one thing that this does really, really well compared to probably some of the other boss fighting games. Although the others I'm thinking of don't do a terrible job of this, but this one just does a really good job of it, is staging you into the gameplay. Because you set up and kind of play that prologue scenario. It's very basic and straightforward. It's pretty easy. But you get 90% of kind of the game loop stuff in there. And so then you can kind of just slowly stage into like, oh, now you get a couple of craft items, and then you can get that, and now it gives you some abilities, and you got a couple of cards to check out that do different things, and you fight a completely different boss. And so it does a good job of like staging you into that. So even that first scenario, maybe it takes 2 hours, but then I think if you were to go back and replay it, you could get it done in like an hour. You know, I don't even think play count would really matter that much. And then as you progress further, the bosses get more interesting and complicated, but you've kind of grown with it, so it's not really, it shouldn't take that much longer. I've not really seen anything take that much longer. Now, in terms of the other comparisons, so I will say basically 2 points on this. One is I think this might have the strongest combat and game mechanics of the boss battlers I've played, and I think I've only played like Oathsworn and Kingdom Death Monster. I feel like I'm forgetting one that I've played, but those are the two that stick out. And to me, those are the two big daddies, right? If you go and do a poll or do a Google search, what's the best kind of boss battler board game? Kingdom Death seems to kind of get number one still, and Oathsworn's kind of a newer kid on the block, but that's the other one I think is really, really well up there. I think Aeon Trespass was the other one that I see mentioned a lot, but I've not played that one. So, and this one though, I think the combat mechanics in Kingdom Death and in Oathsworn are really good. I really enjoy them. But I have a feeling like this is the better one, because for a few reasons. Is the way it scales is very cool. The way everything just sort of interlocks and interacts with each other is really cool, because you've got things that will interact with like the types of cards in your deck and the way the monsters react and behave, either through the behavior deck or their special abilities or like the threat mechanic, and all of these different things like really interact very seamlessly and not too fiddly. Like there's not a ton of tokens, there's a fair amount, but you could go token crazy on this and it doesn't really get there. And there's no dice in the combat, which, that's a taste thing. I don't really care. I like dice. I also don't mind if there aren't any. Like, it doesn't matter. Really, as long as it fits for what I'm doing. And I think here it really fits because there's still some randomness because you have that attrition deck. So you're like, how many, defensive type cards can I get away with here? Or how offensive and aggressive am I going to be, and that kind of thing. And so that really, really fits. And everything just really seems to weave together nicely. And the way the different weaknesses work and the different elements and all that stuff, it just works really well. Now, where I think this is probably at least out of the 3 games that I've talked about just now, where it's weaker is like the narrative part of the campaign. But to me, it's almost like non-existent. It does a cool thing when I'm not played through the whole campaign, but where you kind of will read the narrative and then it asks you some questions which I've kind of purposefully not like looked at ahead of time, but I'd noticed. So at the end of the 11th chapter, it asks you some questions kind of about the world and the world building. So that's kind of an interesting idea there, but it's basically just fight 11 bosses or whatever, and then that's it. Now the cool part of the way that the campaign works, let's strip the narrative stuff out of there. Well, let me beat up on it just a little bit more. There's tons of walls of text that my eyes honestly start to glaze over as I read through it. I mean, it's mildly interesting. It kind of reminds me of, I guess, Monster Hunter, what I've not played, but for some reason, like Horizon Dawn, whatever that name series is. I played the first game a long time ago. Horizon Dawn, Horizon West, that one. I can't remember that. It feels like that, but not robot dinosaurs. This is like kaiju and stuff that are kind of awakening. It just loosely kind of reminds me, because I just like the different sort of ecosystems and terrain and stuff that you kind of interact with. So it has a little bit of that vibe. I mean, not strong, but a little bit. And that's kind of like just it. Like just that kind of flavorful sort of dusting of theme. But the narrative is not really, it's big monsters coming and messing up the land and stuff. But the part that I like about the campaign so far is the way that it feels like a video game almost in a way, where you kind of like, you have like these different sort of alternate paths or alternate ending kind of things, not really endings, but the way you can kind of do different quests. And if you want to play, I think it's optional. I can't remember the name. There's a mode in there and it's optional, but I think you should play with it because it makes a lot of sense, because basically it sets it up so that you can lose the campaign. I think if you lose to the same monster 3 times in a row, then you lose the campaign. But if you beat the monster earlier and there's some other conditions, you get these valor points where you can kind of score yourself. And just based on how that kind of stuff works and the way that it feels very like toolkit focused. It's just like, I'm really going to put together this sort of combo, almost like a Marvel Champions or something like that, or like a LCG style approach, where it's like, okay, I've got this monster, it has these weaknesses, I've got these different items and potions and stuff and my different sort of abilities that I can swap in and out, and I'm going to try to set up to try to beat this boss and find like the exploit that you can sort of, quote unquote, abuse to try to get through the puzzle of it. And that part, I think it lends itself so strongly that it feels like, instead of like it's a campaign, yeah, but the narrative part's not strong, but the evolution and kind of like the gameplay learnings and stuff like that can go on, and just the way you kind of mix and match things, that's really cool. And I find that part really engaging. So if you're not really like story, it doesn't really matter to you that much, and it matters to me, but it doesn't have to matter. I'm like a story snob, where it's like, I don't like the story, so I don't like the game. I mean, to me, in this case, it makes up for it in so many other different ways that I forget that, who cares? No, I don't care. You got some flavoring and some text, and okay, great. I'm a little bit immersed, but what I'm really immersed in is, again, the puzzle of the fight, and it really sort of just gets right to the point. And that's what I think this game excels at in that regard. It's just being able to pick up and play. It's not hard to just sort of jump in and out of a campaign even. You can kind of go look at what you would have got easy. And then, you can see all the stuff on the campaign tracker that you would have unlocked and all that stuff. So it's very easy to do that, jump in and out, which we've done. And it's been a lot of fun that way. And it's like almost, I don't want to say it's like a Euro game, but again, it's about more of the puzzle of the situation, using the mechanics you have to sort of figure out kind of the weakness of the exploit of the boss, and that it does a really, really good job of that. And there's a lot of stuff on my table. One thing I really like is they didn't go insane with the models. I mean, they're big and they're chunky. Like, don't get me wrong, I don't want to oversell it, but they're not like ridiculously sized, or ridiculously sculpted or anything. But it's like, it just fits, it's nice. It's actually relatively compact for the amount of stuff. It's like this one big box and about another set of little boxes about this size. You basically have like 2 of these boxes and that's it, worth of space. But then you've got, like, I don't even know with the expansions how many different permutations. It's got to be over 100. And so you could probably play the campaign, my math's probably off. I didn't spend any time trying to figure this out, but like 10 times, right? Let's be conservative. Let's call it 8 times. And then, but not really kind of do the same thing twice. You could do all these different monsters and paths and stuff and quests and things like that. So anyway, that's Primal. Like I said, really, really solid on the combat, the mechanics, all that stuff. If you really need a narrative for this kind of campaign, then, I mean, it's there, but to me, it's just a little bit, it's like fluff text, But again, the combat, in the progression, the character leveling up, all that stuff, the balancing, the scaling of the players and all that stuff, that's really, really well done. So definitely take a look at it. I think they're coming out with another Kickstarter Game Found, I'm not sure, campaign, so be on the lookout for it. I don't think you can get it right this second, but I think it's coming out really, really soon. So definitely take a look when it comes out. Thanks.